Hi, I'd like to demonstrate now how AASB 136 impairment of assets works when you have to allocate the amount of impairment within a cash generating unit. To demonstrate that, I'm going to assume a simple cash generating unit which has a range of assets: cash, receivables, inventory, property, plant, equipment and goodwill, and we have total assets of $925,000. We do our recoverable amount determination and we find out that the recoverable amount for all of those assets is $750,000, and that means that we're going to have write-downs or impairments totaling $175,000 all up. Now, the first thing that we need to appreciate is that AASB 136 doesn't apply to all assets. In particular, it doesn't apply to receivables and it doesn't apply to inventory, and there is the presumption that those assets will be written down to their recoverable amount, or however it's defined in the particular standard, to the amount which they'll be worth, the fair value. So in this case, we know that the receivables have $5,000 worth of bad debts or doubtful debts, so we're going to reduce the receivables by $5,000, and so that reduces the amount that we have to allocate from 175 down to 170. And we know that the inventory needs to be reduced by $20,000 to reduce it to its recoverable value. So therefore, that leaves us with $150,000 to be allocated in terms of AASB 136. I think it's important that we recognise that whilst AASB 136 doesn't apply to all assets, for the assets where it doesn't apply, you'll typically find that there are alternative provisions which require those assets to be written down to something comparable to recoverable amount. And so this is just demonstrating how these standards work in combination. So we have $150,000 to allocate in terms of AASB 136. How do we go about that process? Well, the first thing that you have to do is you have to write off the goodwill. In this case, there is $25,000 worth of goodwill, so all of the goodwill within the cash generating unit is written off. That means that $150,000 minus 25, that means there's $125,000 to be written off against the remaining assets. The remaining assets consists of three items of property, plant and equipment. These respectively have the values $100,000, $125,000 and $225,000. And you can see the proportion of the asset that this makes up. So what we have to do is we have to allocate the $125,000 proportionally to those assets. That means that we allocate $27,778 to asset 1, $34,722 to asset 2, and $62,500 to asset 3. That of course leaves us with a remaining book value of $72,222, $90,278 and $162,500 for asset 3. Now, as we're making those allocations, what we need to understand is that none of those individual assets can be written down below their individual recoverable amounts. So if the recoverable amount for plant and equipment item 1 was actually $75,000, which was more than the value we have here, we'd have to limit the impairment charge for that individual asset to $25 and allocate the excess to the remaining two assets. To keep things simple, I'm not going to do that here. So we can see that we have three assets having a proportional allocation of the individual assets. So that leaves us with an impairment expense, and we can see an impairment for goodwill, we can see a write-down of bad debts, and we see the impairment being allocated to those three property, plant, equipment assets. And that gives us a reduction in the book value for our cash generating unit of $175,000. Thank you.